This presentation is actually a part of a contribution that Professor Feinberg and I are writing on Miki, and that's a contribution to a volume edited by Professor Murata and Professor Naoe on the Japanese philosophy of technology. So I am presenting, but it's not just mine. So Professor Feinberg will take all the faults. Since Miki is relatively unknown, I will quickly, just one page, a biographical sketch of Miki. And then what from Heidegger and Marx, that's going to be very brief, what kind of ideas that Miki is influenced from these philosophers, so that his sort of like the key philosophical ideas would make sense. And then I will talk about Miki's magnum opus, so to speak, and that's on imagination. And then his view on philosophy of technology from his book on philosophy of technology. Miki was born near Osaka in 1897. And he actually studied under Nishida at the Kyoto University from 1917 on. But after a few years, he went to Germany, and he studied in Heidelberg under Rickert. And also he moved down to Mannheim, and that was in the 20s, 1922. And then he studied with Heidegger in Marburg, 1923. So that's very early Heidegger in terms of Heidegger's own publications. In 1926, Miki already wrote his maiden work on the study of man and Pascal. And his important work, The Logic of the Imagination, that was written in 1939. Now these are, excuse me, the fundamental problems of philosophy from Nishida, where many of the ideas that Professor Murata explained, that was around this time, 1937 to 1939. So I sometimes wonder who influenced whom in developing these ideas. In 1942, his reflections on the philosophy of technology came out, and that is also the time that Nishida was writing his political writings as well. But Miki remained sort of, remained on the ground and kept talking about the historical world. He died in 1945. In September, which means that the war had ended, but no one had let him out of the prison. So he died alone in the prison in 1945. Let me briefly talk about his background influences. One is Heidegger's basically his idea of being in the world and the idea of a hermeneutical phenomenology. And by that I mean that the human beings are already so ontologically intricately related, or of the fundamentally of the world in the way that cannot be separated in terms of the subject and the object. And hermeneutical, because his way of understanding phenomenology was such that the act of actions, now they are not simply actions of a human being in a descriptive sense, but the actions are fundamentally interpretive. So we do things because we understand the world in a certain way and we react. So this way of understanding the human being in an ontological pair, if you will, with the world, that was that he took, maybe there was a conversation, but basically Heidegger developed this much more extensively in Being and Time. But even before the time of being and time, Heidegger had these interpretive way of doing phenomenology against Husserl's transcendental, more descriptive way of doing phenomenology of the consciousness. So for Heidegger, it was not even a consciousness, it was the Dasein. And Dasein is already interpretive in its fundamental ontological meaning. And that idea was also, that idea that Miki took. Another influence, and that is from Marx. Not the later Marx, but the earlier Marx, where the history is interpreted in an ontological way. And also the human beings. Human beings in history, it's not a stable a process that is automatic, but it's actually a concrete, transformative process and actions by the participants. And that is also developed in the philosophy of praxis. So these background ideas in mind, well, the third big influence is, of course, Nishida. And as Professor Murata elaborated, the acting intuition, this koiteki chokkan, as a participatory historical action that from that which makes to the making, and that is a key notion also in Miki. And to understand the world as a dialectical world, as a subjective-objective interaction, and that's a history in the making. And it looks like you are looking at this process from somewhere, but both for Miki and for Nishida, this somewhere doesn't exist. You are in the actual moment, if you will. So what you do is actually, in some small sense, both interpretive and you might actually alter the course of the history in this the ontology of this movement. Yeah, you act in the world. You get up, you go somewhere, and then you pick up something, and then you actually make your breakfast. Maybe you made this thing as opposed to this other thing that has a different consequence, which leads to the other way of doing things, or making a moment, or the realization of the world in some sense. So technology is an elaborate system of these things, but basically you are sort of embedded in the center. And this can be explained, I guess, from a third person, in a God's eye point of view, whereas the people are doing a bunch of things, and there are these subjects and objects relating in this creative way. But I've been reading Nishida in this way where the subject is really at the center of this kind of ontology. So, and I think Miki too, there is this moment where the self, really the self's expressions concretely alter or the influence or make the moment in the here and now, and therefore it can be said to be a part of the history making. In technique, this is a quote from Nishida: technique is an expression of a people's spirit as it interacts with the environment, and through that interaction forms itself. So this is a big way of looking at history that comes from Nishida, but these elements are also seen in Miki. Technology and imagination. Imagination is a concept that Miki takes up to talk about this historical process. Imagination embodies concrete transcendence in the sense that through imagination, we actually realize or actualize concretely that which is beyond, that didn't exist, into a being. In this imagination, it also doesn't come out of nowhere, so to speak. It is actually embedded and a part of our actual interaction, and then we see that which is beyond, and then we try to concretize these ideas. It's in this sense, the transcendence becomes reality or actuality. And it is, I guess you could also say that's a process of immanent transcendence, because the material out of which these transcendence gets realized is in the process of this concrete development itself. From Miki's writings, the actuality of this world is founded upon the logic of imagination. So this immanent transcendence is Miki's notion of capturing what the essence of imagination is. And technology is the concrete expressive manifestation of this imagination. That is a way of talking about technology as these are robust process of imagination becoming reality. And technology gives a certain materiality, if you will, to this process. Miki's quote, "Through technology, human beings create their own forms of society and culture, and moreover, changes them into new forms. Not only culture, but fundamentally speaking, all forms of human action in various social institutions depend on such form-giving activity." So the philosophy of technology is then, by now it should be obvious, it's not a means to an end. It could be in a so the analytic way. Of course, it is a mean to an end, but it's not how technology for Miki it's understood. It's not just to achieve some kind of a goal, but really the whole process is an ontological expression. And as explained, the end could actually be something other than that one planned. Yeah, so these are criticism to the designer fallacy is also shared by Miki. And technology is ontological in the way that being in the world is ontological. Yeah? So it is a fundamental dialectical historical action and process that becomes materialized in a certain way. But now let me quickly say, but that doesn't mean that technology is somehow subjective to the human beings. It is a dialectic with the real material. So once technology is made, it becomes objective in some concrete sense. We imagine things, we bring material things into the world, but at that point, they become independent. And that's in the sense of a negation that Professor Murata referred to. But in this dialectic, Miki, of course, rejects this merely objective scientific interpretation of technology, as if technology is some kind of a human use of a physical law, and then it has its own destiny or something along those lines. It doesn't. Yeah. So in this sense, technology as concretized material, imagination, and action. And Miki's quote, "Technology is fundamentally a form of adaptation to the new environment through the invention of complex forms of action." That sounds very much like Nishida, in fact. So technology is what mediates this very process through producing objects. And probably the ways of production is also part of the whole picture. How do you actually go about producing or the materializing our imagination collectively, singularly, through some kind of a economic means or some other system? So this decision, the moment that you decide through our material world, that is already what would be called technological. Miki's quote again, "As formative, our actions are historical, and historical actions are technological. Indeed, history is created technologically. History cannot be conceived of apart from technology. So broadly speaking, we are ontologically and fundamentally a technological being. That's amazing. That his insight that was already in the 1930s and 1940s. It's really a forerunner to these current debates, maybe current debates from the 90s. Since 20 years ago, 10 years ago, in the field of technology, he's really a forerunner. He already had these ideas way back in Japan as completely isolated from the Western philosophy that was going on at the time. That to focus on technology in this way. Yeah, sorry. Okay, that's it. That was my last slide.